Hello and welcome to Fire in the Valley. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we're joined by the Dr. Serena Goldstein. Good afternoon. Or good morning, I
Good
should say.
afternoon. You're right.
We morning or
Yeah,
afternoon, I'm lost.
I know. Yeah, it's like right around, yeah, like early afternoon here. So yeah, I see the brightness coming in.
Awesome. Well, listen, welcome to the show. So tell us, who are you, what do you do, and where are you from?
Yeah. So I'm a naturopathic doctor. And if you're not familiar, so naturopathic medicine, at least here in the US, it's about 4 to 5 years of medical school. So the first 2 years is all conventional medicine based, so basic science, labs, imaging, diagnostics. Then we have our first set of board exams. The next 2 or 3 years are all the ologies, so endocrinology, gynecology, and so forth. And then we learn botanical medicine. This is usually over like the year or so, like year of clinical nutrition, physical medicine, IV therapy, minor surgery, homeopathy, and hydrotherapy. So using water, just hot, cold, different types to help move blood and lymph throughout our body. And so we learn all these tools. We have more tools in our toolbox to not just treat the patient, but to get to the root cause of disease. And then in addition, we also learn all the pharmaceuticals to know any herb drug nutrient interactions. So when we come out, we're pretty much primary care trained. And that's where what's really cool is I have colleagues and then even myself, we can share different interests. Some will love certain modalities, some will go into certain ologies, some will kind of create their own, and then we can write and speak and practice. And so much about really educating the patient and then what's the least invasive, and then going so on and so forth as to what the patient really needs.
Has this been a straight path to this point, or has this sort of evolved as you've gone along?
The funny thing is, it's been a bit of both because there are words like manifestation and energy and if you want to get into the esoteric, I didn't understand way back. But when I was 15, so I was a competitive gymnast and I played the trombone and all these extracurriculars, and I injured my elbow in gymnastics when I was 15, and I couldn't play the trombone either because you need to hold it up. And it was like, oh my god, I don't know what to do with myself because I was so used to all my extracurriculars after school that I got, well, really depressed. And I say that from a place of, I know depression can be a catch-all, but it was more like numbed out, hopeless, like, oh my God, what do I do with myself now? So I went to the library and I began reading Young, Erickson, and Freud to figure out why why were certain thoughts going on in my head that weren't, usually indicative of the really happy persona that I always had. And the more answers I got, the more I realized I needed a therapist. And fast forward, I found one in high school who changed my life. And then I said, I want to become a PhD just like her. And maybe work with adolescents, but kind of open to the path, but I wanted that doctor. I wanted that PhD. So I started college as a psychology major, surprise, and then Japanese minor because I'd finished with 3 honors when I was in high school, tested into Japanese too. So this was just for fun. I just love the language, but it just didn't work out. And a close friend said, why don't you go pre-med? You could do more for people. And this is kind of flashing back to when I was a little girl and I was like, why are humans on this earth? Like, I just didn't understand our existence. And I don't know, there was kind of rules we seem to follow by society, but then there was this big, great, big, vast world. So something had to happen in between. But, okay, maybe I like went swimming later and just or sat on a rock and I didn't think about it, afterwards. And fast forward from there, that same why that I always had was, okay, well, I can prescribe, but there's got to be more. And there was probably a little influence from the fact that my mom used to cook almost all our meals. So I knew there was something to food, it was just medicine and help, just helping us be healthy. And when I started the pre-med prerequisites that beginning of freshman year of college, that spring, and our learning community, the teacher took us to a naturopathic school where I saw all these modalities, and then I saw doctor as teacher, healing through health, using your body to heal. I was like, wait a second, there's a degree that I now get to learn so much more, that I may get to speak and practice. And oh my God, I could shout from the rooftops that there's no magic pill, and I'll learn conventional medicine. And then, since learning that my first visits with patients were like an hour and then follow ups were a half hour, and oh my God, I get that like yummy, deep rapport with them. And oh my God, it just lit me up. And I fell in love when I was 19. And that was almost 15 years ago.
Oh wow, what a brilliant journey. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
So tell me, before we get really into it, I mean, tell me this, what does fire in the belly mean to you?
It means when you have a passion that overrides whatever fear and whatever stuff and scripts that seem to be going on in your head. And what I've since come to learn is it doesn't happen all at once, because sometimes we don't always know what we're protected from, so to speak, until we're able to transmute to, I'm going to say rationalize, but I think the better word is neutralize. Because whenever there's fear, okay, well, we can think biologically, it's our brain, says, okay, we want to survive. So if we come up against a belief, and maybe that's something we felt safe with, it's what kept us where we were, and that felt like normal to us. And even though it may not have been getting us everything we wanted, it was still good enough. But then this is where a lot of, I know we've heard phrases like, oh, we learn from pain, not happiness, kind of thing. Maybe we get certain events in our lives, snowball by snowball, or sometimes there's a big one. I know we hear a lot of, say, if people have near death experiences, or sometimes there could be life shattering experiences that could feel like that too, that really make us question, who told us this? Where did this even come from? And what would happen if? So to me, fire in the belly means you kind of start crossing those thresholds and realizing there were other voices besides your own. Your own synthesized those voices to believe what you needed to survive. But how are you able to move past those so-called limiting beliefs and take those jumps, while at the same time being patient with yourself and being open to more and more of those evolutions? Because to me, that's also what so much of the meaning of life is.
I mean, would you describe yourself as having fire in the belly? I mean, what stage are you at?
Oh, I feel like I opened Pandora's box recently of just, I'm still surprised of so many beliefs that I held. And I know a lot of say, being doctor, certain, like, to have the office, to full setup, just certain expectations, being a woman, okay, maybe you'll work, but the marriage, kids, how people look at you depending on your relationship status. Or there's always, well, maybe, or maybe you could be married, and then it's like, oh, what are your next steps? What else? What else? So from the woman, the professional, the personal, everyone's always kind of looking for that what else? How much more can we do? Instead of, what's our fullest expression of where we feel comfortable? And part of where I fell in love with this medicine, because I was always looking for more, was I needed that creativity. I knew a long time ago that I was going to be speaking and writing. I didn't know what forms it would take, because I didn't know what podcasts were back then. All I was, oh, I want to be on TV. I want to just reach millions and millions of people, because how cool would it be to make people question, what is health? What is their highest capacity? what does evolution mean to them and healing? And how can I also help educate all these different types of medicines in the world? And I think it was just from my own journey of from psychology into medicine into natural medicine. Actually, I joke that the only herb I knew before med school was echinacea. And even that I hated taking. Go figure, I take it in orange juice, which already has a lot of sugar in of itself. So,
Oh
we
well.
learn now, and it's
What are you? Do you enjoy the learning process? I mean, do you enjoy that, or is it the connection? What is it? Do you know?
oh, I thrive on it. And what I've also come to understand that it's learning from different sources, and part of that is then also learning about yourself and how you take in material. Like sometimes I love going for walks by the water where I'll just put my earbuds in and listen to some things on YouTube. Other times I love to curl up with a good book. I usually have no less than at least 5 different books on my counter, and I'm usually like in the middle of 3 of them depending on my mood, wherever the vibe takes me. And sometimes I just love curling up with a book and a hot cup of coffee. So to learn that about yourself too, like how you receive information, how you learn, it's also a whole other type of self-exploration as well.
Talk to me about ego.
Oh, ego. It's what protects us, and it can also be, well, I was gonna say what destroys us, but I think like with stress, we need stress to survive. But as we see, look what can happen with too much stress. Ego, we psychologically, we have at least 7 different defense mechanisms. And all of these protect us from our mind running wild and doing whatever we want. Because that's why there's rules in place. And this is where there's also an abstractness to life, because what's the balance of doing whatever we want and abiding by the rules? And then that's where I think so much of it comes down to is what are our beliefs? What are we willing to not just let ourselves believe, but allow our beliefs to change? Should we change too, or want different things in life?
Hmm.
And so I think it's yeah, it's never just a cut and dry definition, but it's what we make it at whatever point in time, and just honoring wherever we are in that place too.
It's always interesting, isn't it? As you say, because I mean, you talked about all the different beliefs, etc. I mean, not that I want you to divulge everything, but you talked about sort of a lot of beliefs that you hadn't, or more than you expected, I think was the wording you used. Can you give us a bit of insight into that?
Sure. So growing up, and I've thought of my own story, and I guess part of where to start is, yeah, so growing up, part of the culture too was I had a lot of achievements. I went to camp, I went to private high school. It's that feeling of you're doing everything right. And I loved everything I was doing too. I mean, I was doing gymnastics since I was 3. I started with the piano, shifted to the trombone. I was immersed in it all. And it wasn't until I would say I got into practice, I think about 6 years ago, that when I finished medical school, I was like, all right, go big or go home. And I went right into the heart of New York City because I figured like I would do both, just really like conquer the world. And so I'm going and doing, and I come out like, oh, I'm doctor, I'm primary care trained. And everyone's like, cool. So do you take insurance? And I got some of the same questions, and I'm like, no, I don't. But look, I do other things, and here's all the ways I can help. And then through my own story, I branded into weight and hormones because I felt people, okay, they needed something to latch on to that I was doing. And of course, especially in the medical profession, there's a specialty. It's full of specialties. So, let's do that. And so I joined the ranks and became known, for weight and hormones. And instead of listing all my achievements, I also decided that was around the first time that I decided to share my story on my website about my own, not just weight fluctuations, but the moods, the habits, and everything that came with it. Then a few years ago, I had another transformative experience in my life that I realized as I began helping people with weight and hormones, they wanted more for themselves. They were losing the weight and balancing their hormones, but they still felt like something was missing. And that's when I began realizing, wait a second, how much was I really serving them? They wanted more. And now I'm questioning, how can I continue to provide more? And beyond just treating our physical body, but what were their hopes, their dreams? Was their body holding them back? What were their beliefs? And oh my God, now we're delving into, so tell me about your childhood. And it wasn't just the childhood, it was, how did they grow up? What beliefs were ingrained in them? And where was that holding them back? And then as I began to look at my own life, it was, wait a second. I knew I was never going to be a typical doctor. Sometimes I still don't really know what that means because there's doctors too who speak and write and do all these different things. Perhaps it was the world I was in, um, or however it got synthesized into my brain and where I was. But that's when I began to realize that medicine and our health and healing, it wasn't about a disease anymore or a chief complaint or a concern or, all the questions that I go through. It was, what's our story? What are these patterns in our life that could potentially be repeating and therefore holding us back? And when I began looking back at my own life, it was realizing I was always asking why. I had my own story to tell. It included health, but it certainly wasn't the be all and end all. And so then part of relating and finding that shift was, we all have our story. We all have a picture that's bigger than us. And I'd say that was one of the more transformative, ways of even thinking about what it means to even then prescribe medicine and what is medicine and what is health, when now you're literally looking at the person and their story beyond just a disease.
It's always interesting, isn't it? To understand, and I suppose even in speaking to a lot of people, you talk about causes and effects, and that's
Mhm.
something that fascinates me. A lot of people are very, and a lot of the times they talk about, give people what they need, or sorry, give people what they want, and sort of actually treat them with what they need. And it's a bit like with the interview process, kind of going, yeah, I suffered from this, and it's kind of going, well, was that a cause or effect? And you're going, they're not sure, and you kind of go, well, actually, when we follow the pattern and we follow the path, quite often it's effect based as opposed to that wasn't the initial trigger, right? I mean, does that correlate? Does that make sense to you?
Completely. I mean, this is where too, in asking those questions, because there were questions I begin to get in practice, or I just begin, but I'm sure because some of it was my energy as well to be able to provide that space of, why can't I lose weight? Why can they lose weight and not me? Why did they have it better than me? And I and it was picking up on, because I know I've been guilty of that too. And it can be frustrating. So the thing is, in the society though, we also blame the person, that it is literally all their fault, their habits, what they eat, like tearing apart basic needs and then putting them to blame. Where it's interesting because when I was in college, I took a course called medical anthropology, and I began digging through all those books this past summer that I still happen to have. And I realized that in other cultures, we don't, like shamans, the practitioners, they don't see their patients as victims. They see them as, okay, there's just some things going on. What are these different approaches that we can take to balance it out? And then the family comes rushing to their side. No one's putting ultimatums or sending them off or hoping to get rid of something or the pill for an ill. When I say pill, whether it's pharmaceutical or supplement, just the whole like, oh, cross your fingers and hope it goes away or hope it goes away quick enough. Where in all these other societies, it's about, oh, how can we help the person heal? What does that person really need? And so, even culturally, it's so different. Where here I've had people come in, well, why me? I didn't always have the answer. So I thought, I don't know, but let's dig into it. You still have to take responsibility. We'll work through those layers. But let's look at karma. Let's look at past patterns because maybe there's a lot of patterns that have been repeating themselves and that are just waiting to be broken, brought to light and then neutralized, broken, integrated, and all those different phrases.
What then? What would be your superpower?
First thing that's coming to mind is to tell the whole world that they are so worthy of being on this earth and that they really do have the power to heal themselves.
Is that something you wish you had heard?
Yeah.
Talk to me about mini Serena.
Oh, it's very much tied into, actually it's interesting where I'll see it around health concerns. There's, especially it's part of a basic need, so to speak, and just, like food with going about our daily life. And what came up was what began happening too in my practice is that I began counseling people about their business and money and relationships, talking so far outside of health. But a lot of the ways they were treating themselves and viewing their general health habits was how they were viewing money. That actually nothing was different or segregated. So that's the other thing. Health is not different from our life, it's part of how we view one thing, is generally how we're going to view another. So it's, yeah, so there's healing from beyond just, I know it's like, oh, mind, body, spirit, holistic, and so forth. No, this is like you're really looking at someone's life and their beliefs when
Hmm.
we're literally getting into these foundational perceptions.
What's your earliest conscious memory?
Um, I remember quite a bit from kindergarten. I want to say maybe when I was, good question. I've had a few answers. Um, Probably when I was around 2.5, I think around that age. And I was thinking about this recently too. I remember, I don't remember if I was in our living room or maybe in a park, and the world just seemed so big. And I was like just staring at the sky, and just there was so much going on around me. And I'm like, I'm gonna make it big someday. I was just gonna be big. Because I think that was also one of the last times before I would really let others' what ifs get to me. Where I just were at that point, like having that pure wonderlust of like, I know who I am. question everything and just make it big and be out there. And when I got a little older, I described it as rich and famous, but it was never really about money or fame. It was just, I knew I was going to be of influence or just be of, like, that was my truth. I was just going to share a lot with the world. Um, and I'd say that, yeah, I'd say that was my earliest, just being like, it was, because I remember it was just a pure wanderlust. Like nothing was going to stop me. How could it? I was so sure. Um, yeah.
Were you in your purest form? The true you?
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, have you been here before?
I I feel like I've lived many lives. Um, I have worked with psychics before who have confirmed that, but there was something about me as well that I also felt growing up like I never fit in. And I think that was a lot of it too, that I always felt different. But then if I would say that to people, oh no, but look, you have friends, there are all these other, I don't say excuses, but I guess more 3D understandings of no, everyone has their differences, or you're original, oh, but don't feel bad about who you are. And I'm thinking, I wasn't feeling bad. I just didn't.
It doesn't have to be explained away.
Oh my God, I just never felt like I was part of this world. And holy crap, it literally took until like actually around this year to fully embrace that,
Mm.
which it was like the moment when I guess when I talk of layers being peeled off, that in and of itself was a massive shock because people my whole life were always describing me as an old soul. There were things that were coming out of my mouth when I was 7. I remember my mom always telling me, growing up in New York City and the apartment buildings, that people would just have conversations with me, like just just talking like just like adults or like people, and they would say to her, "Wow, I just had the greatest conversation with your daughter." And to me, I was like, "No, cool. I enjoy talking to people." But there was clearly something there that adults weren't just talking to me like, "Oh, and how's elementary?" or "How's," like in that sort of voice. I remember when I was 13 and I was interviewing for high schools, and there was someone who was shocked that, I guess, a phrase came out of my mouth that sounded very intelligent. And there was actually this really weird look on her face, like, how could I say something like that? So, just certain things, and throughout my life, and as I said, like, I just, I didn't understand what so much, so to speak, what an old soul, um, or even from the spiritual sense, beliefs. I didn't know anything about past lives until last year either. So, the more I began putting my story together of maybe that was also why I had such an affinity for ancient Greek and ancient Egypt too. I loved learning about those histories and I felt such a kinship. And even the more I'm researching into astrology and different medicines, and I was like, oh my God, it there was more of my story that began making sense. And I believe very much too, calling this type of medicine with all these different modalities into my life as well. So yeah, it's so putting together my story, coming into this brand, dancing to the beat of my own drum, because really, what else do we have? Because my next thought moving forward and part of in sharing all this and with this brand is, what if we all had some sense of our story, knew how to weave our, just understand it, embrace it, And what if everyone on this planet lived to their full potential? What would the world look like if we all embraced our gifts and our uniqueness?
Turn your own question on you. What's your highest capacity?
Right?
Your highest capacity then?
I, it's yet to be unknown. Um, one
It's
of
yet
the
to
things
be
I,
unknown. That's an interesting.
yeah, and that was the other thing it's funny, I was going to say former control freak, but at the end of the day, is I've definitely lessened my reins a lot on control of the how things should go and continuously understanding it's that I could still have my goals. What I do need to release is the timeline, the linear timeline. It's having faith that it will happen. It may not look exactly like how I thought, but also releasing the time frame of the how, of the how, the when. Um, so when it comes to our capacity, there are times that if I know deep down, and this also too included redefining success, even just from personal into business. I think from the place of if I knew I was doing all that I could every day, I could go to sleep happy. And sleeping, which was always something I valued so much, which now I've come to understand, not just physiologically, like, oh, that's when all our hormones are made and so forth. But no, it really is where our great ideas come from. And beyond great ideas, it's what helps us literally digest everything we've taken in that day, that week, the interactions we've had. How do we want it? Do we want it to become part of us, or is like, maybe we need to think about what we've just heard or seen and let it go. So circling back again, when it comes to our capacity, it's like the unknown, but that could also be really exciting because then you can kind of wake up a different person each day. And that's actually really fascinating and something I've been experiencing so much of. And it's like sometimes I could plan, but there are other times I'll leave my schedule emptier because who knows what could happen or who I'll meet, or maybe it leaves time for an amazing conversation with a stranger. So there's that flow too.
What would you describe yourself as intuitive, or where are you on the scale?
I believe I'm much more intuitive than I ever gave myself credit for either. The
Hmm.
same thing. I didn't really know what that word was. If ever I had a hunch about something and someone would question me, it's almost like I would want to crawl up into my stomach and just hide. Like I can't. I was gonna say I can't explain it any other way, but I lived a lot of my life questioning that gut feeling. Um, and then even going to medical school, even when I looking back, oh my God, I plopped myself right in the middle of Manhattan and started a practice where other people, I heard, oh my God, like, how could you do that? That's so ballsy. But when I was in that zone of like, yeah, whatever, I need to like go off to, I have my like 10 networking meetings, my 12-hour days. Then I have a networking from 7 a.m. like down to a network. I'm like, oh, home by 10:30 at night. And sometimes see like multiple days of the week. And it was just because then I was also caught with, oh my God, I need to keep hustling. I knew it would be okay, but I literally couldn't, I didn't have the barriers or the boundaries, which it's it was in looking back that I realize now, how important that is too to continue forth. And of course, hold in that intuition and truly believe it. Because your intuition is often going against literally everything that's out there, what we're taught to believe, sometimes what we're told by people closest to us. So yeah, The more I began to trust that intuition beyond that gut feeling, but understanding how things manifest physically as well, all of a sudden it was like, well, you know what? This is my life at the end of the day, and I really need to take care of me. And then it just gets easier. And then it gets really fun because you're like, oh, what am I gonna learn next? And that too is a process.
What triggered that change? I mean, to go through the medical side and, as you say, to sort of hold down the questions, the queries, the sort of, just don't think about it, just work harder, hustle more, do all this, to eventually just being able to let go, or to, what happened?
Yeah. So it was the fall of 2017, and I was hitting a place in my business that, so I was still specializing in weight and hormones, but same thing, I felt like I was maxing out. And this is where I know I've always had I've always had really good intuition. How often I would listen to it, that would be another story. But there were moments in my life that, just like going to medical school, like, oh, because it was something I so wanted and I would be willing to go through whatever it took to do that. This was now another one of those moments that I really wanted to expand my sense of self in my business. Even from a cleaner website to my message and all these different things. And I hit a place that I was like, I need a business coach. I need another set of eyes to now really go through and, help tear apart, so to speak, just everything I was doing. So for the next few months, business skyrocketed on so many levels, from financially to opportunity to network. I was talking about it easier, just I was on top of the world. On the personal side of things, I had recently met this guy, and we were moving well, I was going to say fast, but I don't want to, but not in the judgmental sense, but I think for just our situation and where we were, that we were having some pretty serious conversations. What I see now, I think, before we were truly ready, so to speak. And let's see, so let me I backtrack. Well, yeah, I'll share from this side. So from there, it was like, all hands on deck, business. Now I got the guy. And there was a part of me that was thinking I could finally get people off my back about being single. Because now I'd have it all. Dream. This was everything I was working towards. And eventually things didn't wind up going so well, and we had separated. But a few months later, when I had gone down to Florida to see my parents for my mom's birthday, we all found out that I was 14 weeks pregnant with his kid. And I had no signs. I wasn't showing. And I've actually been pregnant a long time ago, but this was so unlike that one that it was so easy to deny it. I knew way deep down something was wrong. The missed periods, I chalked it up to stress because, hey, it's happened before. That's an easy. And so when that happened and we all found out the amount of blow that I took to my pride, because I was a doctor of hormones. Well, I'm a doctor. So shouldn't I have known this? Shouldn't I have investigated? Shouldn't I have been responsible? Because then it's amazing how many people then was looking at me like everything was my fault. I was like, how did that even happen? because a day later I had gotten an abortion, flown back up to New York, and gone right back into business and networking and seeing patients that week. Like, the I didn't even think of taking a break because all I saw was, great, this was just another hiccup into my success. I gotta just sweep that under the rug, especially because now I was single, I'm a professional, and no one can ever hear about this. And that never sat well with me because I've always valued honesty and transparency. And now realizing that those are such core beliefs in me and what had happened, there was a massive clash. And it's almost like you're two different people. And I thought, who was I and what were my beliefs to have all of this happen at once? And that really, those two questions led for beginning counseling 2 weeks later, because now I was just randomly bursting out crying and I was not going to accept hormones. It's just an excuse. But I will say, a few months later, when the counselor asked me, "Who are you outside of doctor?" I couldn't answer her. I couldn't even say one nice thing about myself because my identity was so wrapped up in, in how in everything I was doing rather than who I was as the person. And even moving forward from there, tearing my life apart in 2018. And then as 2019 comes in, it's funny, I thought it was going to go back to normal. There is no normal. Now I've, really done so much in analyzing how I got here. Now as I'm piecing it back together, oh my God, I'm speaking at a professional conference. I'm actually putting my longtime love of psychology so much more back into practice, but in ways that I love, not just so much the textbook, but these conversations. And there was more of that. And when I injured my knee that fall, that August, that's what really just took me back and saying that I think I have a lot more to learn. And that injury, which I could have gotten really depressed over because I was now killing it in business. And I had even gone back to gymnastics at like age 30, 31, getting all my old tricks back. But I didn't realize that I was still in the same going and doing. And I was having my own inclinations about things. And same thing, was another, it wasn't just the pregnancy, it wasn't just the knee injury, but it was, how do we let things get to those points? How can we even really look at those from an objective point of view? And yeah, these were critical times in my life, and I see now that have just, but it's opened me up in such meaningful ways. And I think that's the best way to put it, is how these things really do happen for us and not to us.
Do you, I mean, are you where you're supposed to be? Are you in alignment with yourself?
I have felt I feel the most aligned and the most complete that I've ever felt. And as you ask that, the other thing I realized I didn't mention was, growing up, I always felt like something was missing. And I think this is also just always feeling like I was different. And because that missing piece was that I never really felt like I fit in. Like, I was always a social butterfly and I always got along with everyone, but also in many ways my head was always in the clouds. I was always dreaming about the meaning of life and why we're here, and but why can't anyone give me an answer? Besides just, working until 5 o'clock, and that, it just didn't add up. And it's like going your whole life feeling like something's missing, and then you try all these different ways to fill it up, whether it's with certain friends, habits, work, just whatever stuff that we have or whatever we need to tell ourselves, so to speak. And it was actually these, well, I was going to say breakdowns, but the fact that I also chose to take these events and let them change my life too, because I could have very easily have, gone right back into everything I've been doing either, gone into that almost, I was going to say pity party, but, just, I mean, we take the time that we need, but, gone into a more dormant place and just, got carried on. But instead, I, chose to say, hey, maybe there's more to this. So that missing feeling, I realized there was nothing about me that was ever missing. I was just made to create my own world. And that my values come from what's the purest intention. And since, learning there's even different ways of communicating, like being vulnerable with friends, like just sharing how I feel, not just all my accomplishments. Um, being feeling that I could share who I am, because even everything I've shared to since this far, I've I've never been able to share before. I couldn't, because I was still very wrapped up in the what ifs, and I just wasn't at that place yet. And being able to, knowing that's my truth and how I work and how I move in the world, it's like, oh my God, I'm excited. Like, I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for my potential. And yeah, it's just life, right? So,
Uh, I mean, do people get you?
yeah. And that's the other cool thing. Your vibe attracts your tribe. I I have some really close friends now, and I feel like my conversations with them, we don't just, sure, we'll talk about what went on in our day, but we will talk about the meaning of life. We'll talk about the deeper meanings. We'll vent, but it's not just to vent. Or if it is, it's like, hey, do you have the space to hear me vent right now? It just, like in a very conscious awareness, and realizing that people are actually yearning for this too, for the deeper connection. And, as I said, I've seen it in practice, where the more I began becoming more open about my experiences, including, I've had very vivid dreams, and actually I've had them since I was a kid. And the more I've been open to not just, I guess, because part of what I do, but first it comes into my own life, then I work to understand it. Then there's that part of connecting with the whole and humanity, because it's like as within, so without. And that kind of macro and micro all sort of working together. The more I feel like people, whether it's, if I'm doing a talk or even asking these questions, the more patients have revealed to me. And it's like there's a sense of tranquility and a calmness in being able to share all this. That no, you're not crazy. We are such an interesting species, and there's so much out there. And we've only in many ways just begun. So isn't that also part of our potential and this human experience, is to experience, have these different connections, learn about ourself ultimately through others, taking the whole, well, if things happen for us and not to us, it also totally shifts how we think about our own health and even our motivation in picking ourselves up and moving forward. So it's, yeah, I feel like I have finding and continuing to find so many people who really do love these types of connections, and on the flip side are also yearning for this as well.
Bit of a potential spoiler alert. I mean, is weight and hormones connected? Like, is that
So much.
okay?
And and the funny thing is, one of the toughest truths that I've had to learn about myself is that how I began to feel about myself, and the more I accepted who I was, my uniqueness, my values, and the more I began to have fun with like, ooh, what am I going to learn about myself next? It was like the weight just dropped off of me. And the funny thing is, the scale looks more similar to where it did when I was in high school than it did when I was, uh, yeah, my first, I would say even like 4 or 5 years of practice. And and I say that from the place of, most importantly, because because people would also be coming to me after the cleanses and the diets, and like they wanted the long-term success, hence where so much of, talking about this would come in, is that I've been able to maintain this weight for, yeah, I think it was around this year when I began noticing, and it was like, oh, I'm not worried anymore. And if I do notice that pound or two, because I'm actually about 5 feet, so I'm gonna notice a pound. It's like, all right, I'll think back and, okay, where was my headspace then? What was I eating? Was I exercising that much? Okay, but I was where I needed to be. I think I was going through a few things. I know how to recalibrate. Like it doesn't invoke that same fear and control and anguish and hatred and my worth and attractiveness and all this stuff. And that's actually very much sacral chakra, which is so much of hormones. That's where, do some chakra work, and I began to see all these correlations, because weight is also, what are we shielding ourselves from? As I am totally revealing, as whatever questions you need to ask, I'm here and I'm out there. What is there to be hidden, so to speak? And having that safety, because then that means we're safe within us. So it's that twofold piece of, yes, this very much correlates. And I think sometimes more than we may realize, because if diet and lifestyle ain't always working, this is where we're at.
If I'm understanding correctly, then I mean it's in terms of how our bodies are performing as such. So that is this sort of almost the hormone part, and then sort of stress or disease or whatever is then held in the weight part. Have I picked that up correctly?
Yeah. So what I noticed is that there's like all these different patterns, and we can kind of I guess I would say transpire, but really go through the different, from the physical body to the mental emotional, because physically, I mean, of course, I'm always taking a look at, like what's literally happening hormonally. Is your blood sugar, thyroid, looking at all the labs, like that physical side. But at the same time, even our fat cell has about 10 different receptors for blood sugar, thyroid hormones, vitamin D, stress, hunger levels. So why are we thinking that weight management is a magic pill, when even our fat cell is literally telling us that there's so much more that we need to look at? So then, moving into our life, well, as I've talked about before, health is not a blip of the bubble of life. It is part of our life. So it's also how we treat and nourish ourselves. Are we using food to help or harm us? However, what's our mindset? Because we could also be eating the healthiest diet, but if we're eating it when we're crazy stressed out and running around, we're not giving ourselves the chance to truly digest all the nutrients that that food could be providing, because it's kind of turning off our digestive system, which all that gut bacteria also helps manage things like weight, bloating, so forth. It also helps metabolize hormones, especially estrogen. So we're really working across all levels of saying, well, your body is like is a metaphor for your life. And then what are these stories that are also feeding into it? Because if also there's hormones and other things happening that are unbalanced, well, that could be affecting our mood. And so then that could also be affecting how we're going about our habits as well. So it's this wonderfully interwoven web. And that's where, like, per person is where it's like, hey, where do we really start? And that's, yeah, now we're going into the person's own journey.
Do you find, I mean, even when you just meeting someone, I mean, do you get a sense? Do you get almost a connection with them on a non-verbal
I
level?
do.
Hmm.
Yeah. I and I think and that was the other thing that I knew I was observing, but I began realizing too that it may also open Pandora's box of how we think about healthcare. And I know I shared how in indigenous cultures they look at the person as, like, hey, how can we help you? Let's have all the family beside you and so forth. We are here. And I think weight is the perfect example of how much we're ready to shame the person, because it's all of a sudden our judgment that they're not healthy, which then of course they'll begin to hear, and it will just get ingrained in them. And like I said, just kind of in my own personal experience too, is that I remember it was beginning of second year of medical school, and I gained about 30 pounds in about 3.5 months. And that was not like, oh, my little 5, 10 pound, that I fluctuated with in college, where I tried to control all my food, with like running to cardio with the South Beach diet bar in one hand and like counting calories in the other, and just, I don't know, whatever diet of the day was. And here I thought I was doing everything right, especially in naturopathic school. And now it's like, oh my God, I can literally only wear my sweatpants. And that had never happened before. And all I could think about was, oh my God, like, how did I do this to myself? Like, it was all me and my stuff. And I grew up in a pretty fit family too. So, oh my God, what was winter break going to be like when I was going to go down and see them? And it's interesting, even if regardless of what other people say, how we begin to interpret it, because all the head games and mind games that we could play on ourselves are more often the most cruel compared to whatever anyone else could ever say or do. And so then it becomes, like I said, flipping medicine on its head of, let's start working there. How can we actually, the moment the patient walks in, saying, we're in this together, yes, I will help guide you to take the responsibility, but even then, it's still your responsibility. I can only provide, the tools, but the person's been in their body so much, longer than I know. And so that's when, yeah, a lot of my practice began shifting. More power I began giving the patient. And then their life began changing, because it wasn't just health. Oh my God, they were getting new ideas for their business. They were meeting new friends, finding new communities. Maybe there's another portion of their life that they literally needed to clean up and they decided to join certain groups. Um, so it's, and in the meantime, then, oh my God, the scale went down. Or maybe their win was they chose a healthier food, but it wasn't out of punishment or deprivation. They really enjoyed it. They were like enjoying life now. Like, oh, what can I learn about myself next? So it just became different, kind of a bit of a deviation per se of what I feel I was taught, even in how to conduct a visit, so to speak. But it was a way that worked for me and for my patients, and it's it's one of the most fulfilling things I'd say I'm even continuing to do now.
Wow, it's to have that, yeah, to have that connection, and is so so powerful. And that, yeah, it's the next level, really, isn't it? That you can actually help people, and it's not just the, dealing with the effects, right? You say it's helping letting the body help itself.
Yeah. And that's where and it's funny because when I started realizing this, I actually thought I was going crazy. Because once again, it wasn't like directly what I was taught in school, so to speak. Um, I mean, granted, we all have different clinic shifts, and of course, so much of this is derived from there. But the way I was synthesizing it and understanding it, it was also my background in psychology, and then it was through my own life and experiences that was my way of giving. And so as I thought I was going crazy for realizing that, wait a second, there really is so much more power than we believe to even sticking our feet in the dirt and drinking water, that then I began researching ancient medicine, like Socrates, and then our mathematicians, and just like Paracelsus, like all these Hippocrates, like their beliefs and how they viewed people and just the body. And what was so interesting is that, you know, even say knowledge of astrology was that physicians never just knew science. They knew math, physics, astronomy, and this was actually a common theme that I was finding even as um, this I've also done some research too into sacred geometry, which are the many structures in the world. So this is where like there's certainly pictures of like how the placenta looks like the tree of life, even metaphors as to how nature is synonymous to our body. um, the meaning of even us as the pentagon, how like numbers have their own meanings as well. And it was like even mathematicians knew physics, to some extent the body. Um, like no profession was without having knowledge or some sufficient type of knowledge of others. And so that was mind blowing too, of like, oh my God, this was ancient medicine. This is how this was the healing for the soul. Yeah,
In your previous lives, when you previously talked about almost the, sort of back to almost the Egyptians, I mean, do you think there's been a medical slant? Is that potentially where there's an attraction back to? Do you think?
I think so.
Mm.
I mean, I know I was told that I was, but I will say I also just feel it. I've just always felt an affinity towards ancient Egypt. And yeah, I say ancient Egypt, Greek mythology. Like I remember even when we read oh, wasn't the Odyssey. There we go. I was like, there's always the Iliad and the Odyssey. Like, I love that book. Um, I was always fascinated by it. So I've lost track of how many books I've read. That was always something. I was reading from a very early age too, just pick things up. And when I think of things, not just things, but I'd say concepts that came natural to me, or the way I could always see the big picture. It always really did make me wonder, how am I? How am I able to see all this and conceptualize it and just under not just understand it, but as the two examples are, I could never really, well, I mean, of course I could rogue memorize, but where I felt most comfortable in school was if I came to a lecture prepared, if I was able to synthesize it in my brain first and then show up at the lecture. The other part was I remember being in medical school and giving myself grief about, I mean, I knew the Krebs cycle, I knew the enzymes, I could draw the structures, but where I loved researching and thinking about things was actually the big picture, which was part of, how this medicine too really appealed to me, because it was about how the whole body works together. Um, I prided I prided myself on the fact that it was almost like, yeah, that same head in the clouds feeling was how I would see the person's health and then their story. And it was like taking this bird's eye view. But not gonna lie, I shamed myself for that a lot, because that's not what a scientist is supposed to do. We're supposed to recite stuff and recite studies and be so focused on research and be super impressive, where I like that, but what about the interpretation side, that where I could really relate to people, scientists or not, but be able to translate all that knowledge into now what's usable to make them think about their own life. And the more I began embracing that was when I realized, oh wait, there's then what's hidden in me that I'm beginning to uncover and will continue to, then yeah, what's hidden in others.
It's gosh, it's a big. I mean, do you fully understand all the things that are coming to you now, or are you sort of almost grab a bag of popcorn and sort of wonder what's going to happen next, almost a bystander in your own life? Does that make sense?
Oh man, I just had a mental image of that, and I was like, you know what? I'm at the place. I think especially this year that kind of pulled the rug out from everyone, and for the most part. And I'm allowing myself to do that now, to grab the bag of popcorn, because we need those moments too. And I think that's such a great visual, because it's also knowing that if if we keep giving and giving, and I know this from, our from the individual is, to the exterior, or the world is just like the world couldn't keep going as it was. I mean, we were destroying nature, resources, so on and so forth. And then it's like, where in our lives were we maxing out? um and coming into that place of, yeah, where do we need to step back and just trust that, just like the pendulum swings in one direction, it will go and swing in another. But the problem is, it's also where we realize, oh my God, what's the unknown? And that could be really scary, because I too had a thought of, okay, I'm going to move right back into the city, and my practice and my life was going to look just like how I was raised. I I had a few other thoughts for myself, but for the most part, that's exactly what it was going to look like. And oh, it was so not. And the funny thing is, how my life is starting to unfold, even from, moving from a specialty into this creating my own, and then living my own truth in this world and continuously working on shedding these layers to be my most unabashed self, to also help provide the space. It's like, but that's where I feel most comfortable. And so then there's that balance. And at the end of the day, it's maybe this is a larger scale well, say larger scale, but I think this is where I'm more conscious. Where before it's like, going through changes and you, okay, try to talk yourself, give yourself the pep talk, the okay, the whew, okay, we got this. Block out everyone. They don't know what they're talking about. And then we take this whole other attitude of like, you know, rally, rage against the world. But then there's another way of handling change that just becomes that present. Yeah, step back and grab the popcorn. Let's reflect on the fact that, you know what? Yes, or I've had patients too who will like, oh, but I messed up and ate a certain food. Yeah, well, you know what? This was the first time you didn't shame yourself because of it. So that's a win. Like, let's focus on that for a little bit. Let's redefine everything, even health. Go look at lab ranges, even. Or maybe what looks good on paper. And it's where I've even had wellness professionals and fitness professionals work with me because on paper they're healthy, but they want more. And they just, something has to be tweaked. So great, let's go and figure that out. What's your version of health? What's your best life? And then who do you want to be in all of this? And how can that be exciting and fun? And it's finding that joy is it's a lot of where I work too.
It's interesting as you speak, it's like that healthy wanting more. It's kind of like, is that an imbalance, or is that you know, uh, is that like a false ceiling they've created for themselves?
I think it has yet to be revealed, and that's also per person
Hmm.
because sometimes there really is an imbalance. And maybe whether it's the right test that shows it, or you know i've I saw a trend in numbers, or as they start describing their life to me is when I start to, it's almost like, I mean, I maybe some well, I was going to say I'll usually keep a straight face, but usually there will just be some sort of look like, and is there really balance in your life? And nearly every time as they're talking, it's like, oh, wait a sec. Because I think the patient knows too. But same thing, they've probably been called crazy, or they're fine, or oh my God, they put on a few pounds, they want those few pounds off, but everyone tells them they're fine. And they're like, no, I'm not. And I remember that because when I injured my elbow and I was having a lot of dark and twisty thoughts come in, and I was, you're overachiever, life is a bowl of cherries, like life is good. Like why wouldn't it be? We're here. And all of a sudden I'm now coming home for the first time in my life pretty much every day at like 3:30, 4 o'clock. Life life was not good. I literally didn't know how to handle that change. And now with two passions being so-called taken away, finding refuge in the library, well, trying to figure myself out, eventually I said to my parents, I need to see a therapist. And they're like, no, you're fine. And I'm like, no, because I didn't feel safe telling anyone what those thoughts were. Because even if I tried, and we'll see it out in the world too. If people tell you you're fine, it's more about them than it is in many ways really about you, so to speak. And but without really understanding that, then I just kept insisting that I needed a therapist. And we tried quite a few. And it wasn't until actually after that summer, beginning of my junior year, that we finally landed on the one who would then change my life. So I guess I would say to that too, trust your gut. Because even though I didn't quite know to the extent of what that meant, I just knew the other therapists weren't going to serve. But there was going to be someone who would, and I would be willing to keep trying until I found that person.
I've noticed in a while, like your language changes sometimes, and you pluralize. And there's a we, there's a, and even earlier when you asked, you said a comment earlier saying, I had a couple of answers, and it's almost like there was an internal committee sort of presented to. Does this make any sense? I mean, there's a pluralization
It
there. There's
does, and I know where you're talking about, and it's true, and I've noticed that a lot within myself as well. That it's like I'm less concerned about. I was about to say carry myself, but it's not so much that. It's where there was a point in time that it was like the way I would prepare and to make sure I would hit points in these recordings and podcasts or in a lecture. And of course, I'm still always mindful of that, but a presence, I was gonna say a wall, but it wasn't even that. It was like, it was gonna be really weight hormones and my practice, like my main plugs. And actually, in all of this, I'm also allowing that, yeah, you know what? There have been some questions here that really got me thinking, and I'm going to show that. And that's okay, because that's also part of just human connection and expression. And in where you had asked before was the other piece too was making sure I'm also following your storyline. And where I almost had deviated was there was part of that story where I remember feeling very shamed by a doctor about my body. And that was where I really just decided to throw myself into work. And so where it was kind of part of the story at that point in time, I realized it wasn't the main piece. Hence some of the, okay, do I share this at this point or move on? So yes, it was in that moment that I was like, we'll move on, but it was certainly something that if we came back to, I would be more than happy to reveal or to share rather.
It is. It's fascinating. Do you have multiple voices going on? I always struggle
Oh,
to know
oh,
how to say it. People talk. Do you hear voices? And you're like, no, no, no. It's like, do you have an inner critic? Oh yeah, I've got one of those. Okay. Do you have sort of internal dialogue goes on, and is there multiple dialogues?
oh God, I am always thinking. And that's the other thing I've learned to love that about myself. 'Cause there's a lot of great stuff up there. It's just what I do. I love observing. I love reading all of that, but having these different intonations, it's where I found, yeah, there's certain responses that I'm used to answering. So, all right, I can move through those. Others where, yeah, I will stop and pause, and maybe there will be a few phrases a little quicker than another to say, hey, but let's really land on and give space to, oh, wait, this was the point. But oh yeah, no, I so much going through my head, but as I said, I've learned to love and accept that.
Do you find yourself almost having to? Do you back off from yourself, or back off? Sort of pull the gates down a bit and kind of going, yeah, this is heading a bit too crazy. So we need to it's just keep it between ourselves. Yeah, it's like,
Oh yeah, well, because then there's too, reading the energy
hmm,
of, of the conversation, so being mindful of, okay, and that's something I've learned as well. At what point does it become rambling?
hmm.
I think that's with anything. Is at what point, okay, wait, do we really need to step back and then make sure that, this is really our truth? And actually, another anecdote is like casting spells. And I remember reading this recently of the point to where like words, like spelling, speaking, like how powerful they are. So that's the other piece too is wow, we have so many intonations, we have so many ways we can speak, words to emphasize, which side note, throat chakra, you really speaking our truth. But then it's also knowing that we have two ears, aka listening for a reason. So finding and striking that balance, I think that's also one of the many interesting dances of life as well.
Wow. Yeah, it's do you I mean do you find I mean do you I mean, would you be proud of yourself? I mean, you know, generally, how are you with yourself? Do you love yourself? Do you follow that mantra, or where are you at?
Oh, I love myself. I am so happy with who I am in the world. And it's interesting because I've thought a lot about this too. That process in getting there, I guess, triple faceted because it's the getting there. Then when you realize, well, there's never really a there because you'll always keep, you'll want more or keep evolving, or there will be another step or goal, or like, oh, I did this, and then what? Then there is that presence and that appreciation of, but wow, look at how far I've come. Because I remember when even yeah, in many ways I did always love myself. I did always feel good about myself and confident even when most of my life I did feel that missing piece because I just always knew that it wouldn't be my whole life. I didn't know when, some of the tides would turn, but I always had hope. And the more I began embracing excuse me, where I am now, it's also been a bit nostalgic, a bit of a mourning. So I guess when it comes to loving ourselves, loving different parts about ourselves, what I see, what I could attain now is like, oh my God, how hurt was I back then? Did I even give myself enough credit, which likely not, of really how much I was just coping or moving through life. So it's almost like a mourning and a sadness that's taking place as well. And I feel like that's something no one ever mentioned or talked about. It's like, or, like with weight, it's like, oh, healing, lost weight, looking like fantastic. But the process and the integration of you're creating a different life and a different sense of self for moving forward. That means you're going to move in the world differently, and that's a bit of an eye opener and a shock too. So it's a lot of emotions and a lot of experiences all at once, and that's kind of become a like loving that process too was another key piece.
I mean, do you think you'll ever fully sort of have cleared the backlog, if you know what I mean? Does that make sense? And you talked about layers there a couple of times. Do you think you'll get to the core, or is that what life is? Yeah, it's like this infinite Russian doll. You just keep, you open one and another one, another one. It's like,
I think in many ways that the Russian doll, so to speak, has yet to be determined, but there's always that sense of presence and joy, which is like when we're totally in the zone with life, like whether it's with our hobbies, with our friends, and whether that's the meaning of life, our own core, I I think still has yet to be determined, but it's like sometimes we don't know what this lifetime will bring. Especially if you want to get into generational karma and past lives and incarnations, the meaning of karma as well. Um, but bringing it back into the present, well, part of what gives us joy is also clues to our core self.
What's karma mean for you then? Sorry, I'm a little confused.
I'm sorry?
Karma, what does it mean for you then?
Oh,
Sorry.
think it has multiple meanings, and what I've come to experience it as, the more patterns that I've seen in my life, I've seen in my family, I've seen in my religion. So I'm Jewish. Just like I know every religion, for example, has their guilt, but it's also a matter of how are those patterns showing up in your life? Are they helping you? Are they hurting you? And I guess when I say hurting, it doesn't have to mean like direct, oh, oh my God, worst thing ever. But, if you have a goal and that could be something holding you back, so to speak, is that what I've also come to learn is if we're trying to break through something or like repeating the same cycle, think of like diets, cleanses, and I say this because these are usually the most common, is that if you're repeating the same cycle, where's the change? What are you actually hoping to achieve? Say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. So kind of when it comes to karma, that's one example of, are you repeating the same thing over and over, or are you ready to learn a new lesson, but not just learn, understand where a new lesson may be coming from? And so I think that's a lot of where we are now too, is we've learned a lot these past, life that we've had, seeing others in our life, moving through society. I think especially now moving forward, what life do you want to create for yourself? And it's also, how do you want to feel and experience it as well?
Who would you? Is there anyone you would describe as sort of inspirational or sort of hero in your life? I mean, is there anyone that's sort of stood out?
Um, the funny thing is, not really. Oh, when I was in middle school, actually, Madonna was my idol. In a way, kind of still is. And it was because of the way she could reinvent herself. And I always admired her evolution. The way it just, granted, we don't really hear her name now, but pretty much from the 80s to the 2000s. Oh my God, that's a lot of like seeing her life and the way she just put herself out there to me, and especially where I was like, wow, that I was in awe of that. And since then, part of that hesitancy was also feel like I've been blessed with so many different, not just mentors, but really teachers in my life. And many of these teachers, too, were even relationships that I sought because, especially, I say a little bit of middle school, but especially high school really fostered that, going to their open hours, say even in college, I would just, hey, if I didn't understand something, I would have no qualms going to a teacher's office, say, hey, could we go over this? And I know that was really encouraged where I went to high school. So I kind of took that and then continued to take that with me. Same thing, even in medical school, that whether it was different teachers, different clinic shifts, I've shadowed some wonderful doctors. Uh, Coming into New York City, there were a few people that, oh my God, when I just got there, I don't remember how many cold emails I sent to people. And not, a number wrote back, but there was also someone who, like, we would go to coffee a couple of times a year. And she was definitely someone, like definitely that mentor from personal to professional, 'cause she was also in the healthcare field. And having having that, but once again, it wasn't just one person. It was, I love that she was there, and that's really who sticks out. But then there were also so many other people in my time too in New York that have also just continued to feed the professional, the personal, and just sometimes it's even that passing person with some words of wisdom that you didn't even realize that maybe you needed to hear. So I've kind of seen everyone as like who crosses your path is you're learning something.
Makes sense. What's a sort of a non-guilty guilty pleasure for you?
Yeah. Oh, not guilty. Oh God. Guess if being on topic of health and food, Mexican. I love Mexican food, and I will more than happily polish off a bag of chips.
What
That
sort?
said, I'm sorry?
What sort?
Oh, anything salty, like
Mm.
salty, like blue chips, tortilla. Actually, one of my favorites too is the veggie flax chips at Trader Joe's. But yeah, I tacos, guacamole, like I will more than happily just chips, salsa, maybe some refried beans. My mom actually makes a fantastic nacho dish, so I already know to have like a light lunch that day. That's really, I'd say, my main. Some dark chocolate here and there, but I'd say in this point in time too, my what I really value is like I love taking big trips. I love time to myself, to read, to be in nature. Like those are kind of that like shut off from the world, literally. Like, even if my phone doesn't have service, that's kind of yeah, I'll take this.
Who who did you get your doctorate for?
Me. That it was because to me, while I was attached to the doctor title, there was also that part of me that saw, but you know what? This is going to help me learn more. And that overrode any sort of, um, let's say, I don't really want to say people. Well, I think there were some ways I was people pleasing in other ways, like, or oh my God, what would people think? But ironically, when it came to my degree, that was probably, yeah, like that was literally all for me. So,
It's good. I mean, it's a great place to be because
yeah,
it's amazing the number of people that do stuff for others,
right.
intentionally, unintentionally, or otherwise. Just yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of always a great way to be. So tell us, I mean, in terms of if you had like one or two words to describe your fire in the belly, what would it be?
Oh, to describe,
Your fire in the belly in one or two words.
oh, like describe where I'm at.
Yeah, your
Like,
own, your sort of your passion, your fire in your belly. What is the core of you
um,
in one or two words?
the core, truthfulness and purity.
Well, why
Because
truthfulness?
it's really easy to lie to ourselves, and in some ways to lie to others, to push things aside, rationalize, to not to do things against our will, even if it's small. But then if we get away with it, it builds up. Um, I found that just telling the truth, being honest with ourselves, asking for help if we need, whatever it is, it's really freeing. Like sometimes if you get into an argument with someone or you need to clarify things, it could really suck in that moment, but coming out of it, oh God, it's like sometimes I feel like I'm walking on air.
Is it, I mean, are you good at holding the mirror up to yourself, or does it take, do you have to bounce it off somebody to get it?
I let's see, I think it depends. Sometimes I do need to talk it over with someone. Like if I realize I am getting too caught up in my head, and that's usually if like it's now just interfering with whatever tasks I need to do. Either I'll go journal or like, call one of my friends. I'm like, hey, can I just talk this out? Because yeah, maybe I do need some insight. But then there's other times where like if someone says something that kind of just irked me, maybe I don't know why. I would actually take my own time and figure it out myself first just to make sure like I'm not coming into a conversation full of emotion. Say, hey, how can I make sense of it? Because why did it trigger me? Which is so different than how I would usually react or used to react. Think about why it triggered me. And then when I open up the conversation, I can say, hey, I felt this. I'm owning these feelings. While yes, you said that, I'm taking responsibility for my actions and my feelings afterwards. And then it just so no one's blaming each other, no one's guilting. It really helps us talk on a level playing field.
Is it's Yeah, so that's self-reflection. Just out of curiosity, when you're working with people, I mean, are you do you ever struggle with sort of taking on their sort of energy, or I mean, are you able to just process quite quickly and easily, someone else's um, effects, feelings, etc.?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to put the words quickly per se, but I take it in. And I think for a long time I always did. But because I didn't really know what these words were, for a long time and just understand that it was part of, my empathy or just who I was, it left a little easier for projection. So that's something I am very conscious of, of like, let me make sure it continues to be about them, that I'm not projecting, so that way I'll also engage them and ask too if I ever share whatever it is about myself. That was also a big change in my communication as well. And then boundaries, because then it also means if I'm taking a lot in, then I'm going to need those boundaries in the times that I could see patients. Times, days, those were big. Like it's not all day, every day. It's, yeah, like I really like my morning. So I tend to see people, later on in the day. Um, and then even being with them, it's also being able to say, hey, I know there's a lot. Here's what I'm getting. And then let's even take care of this now. We could always work on, let me make note and we could talk about this another time. So being able to sense that as well, has been very helpful.
Well, awesome. And listen, I'm so grateful for you sharing all that.
Yeah.
So tell us, where can people reach
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
follow you, track you down, hunt you down, stalk you?
Yeah, right. You could always find me on my website. So that's drserenagoldstein.com. And you can follow me on social media. I have my links there. I also offer a complimentary 20-minute phone call. So just if you want to explore, just hey, what are these things going on? Maybe there's a few random symptoms, concerns, thought processes of like, oh, something's not right. Well, we'll figure it out and see where we can go from there, or how I can best be of resource. Facebook, I have my professional page there, and then Instagram too is where I post a lot of just very, I was gonna say thought provoking, but in the sense of like just yeah, getting the brain going a bit. It's versus I'll give you the information, but hey, let's think a little critically about it. And that handle is Dr. Serena G.
Love it.
Yeah.
Serena, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Is there a final message you'd like to leave with people?
I would love to hear from you. I know this is different. If there is any way I could be of help or of thought process, then yeah, any way we can connect, I'm always happy to be in communication.
Love it. Serena, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.